Welcome to the Jboy Show, hosted by Jake Crain, the fastest growing sports show in the nation.
I'm Coach Hugh Freeze.
This is Super Bowl champion Brandon Graham.
Hey, this is DJ Shockley, and you're watching.
And thanks for watching the Jboy Show.
All right, everybody, thanks for hopping in again on another Recruiting Roundup. Excited to talk some SEC recruiting as now everything's open. You have people that are able to take visits, prospects. You got guys that are able to work out. I think you're going to start seeing some more commitments as we get closer toward the season when everybody kind of catches back up at least a little bit. Going to get started off with Dan Harralson for Vols Wire for USA Today. He's also the host of the Tennessee Two-A-Days podcast. Going to talk some Tennessee recruiting and a little bit of College World Series with him. But first, I do got to give a shout out to betonline.ag. Head over there today. The online casino is always open, whether it's Major League Baseball, whether it's NBA, soccer, anything you want to bet on that's out there. They've got props, parlays, teasers, pleasers, everything like that. And if you go sign up right now on the website or mobile, you get a 50% sign up bonus. That is a short time they're going to be offering that. You need to go sign up now. It's betonline.ag. Head over there today, and best believe once these lines start coming out for the college football season, we're going to be hitting that hard, see if we can't do as well as we did last year. Made a lot of people a lot of money. Going to be introducing a segment to that as well, but head over to betonline.ag today and tell them that Jboy sent you. But excited to get Dan Harralson in here, talking a little bit of Tennessee recruiting, a little bit of baseball now that they're in Omaha, even though they did get beat the other night. Dan, I really appreciate you joining us, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's exciting times. Like you said, it was a loss to Virginia for Tennessee in the College World Series for the opening game, but really excited to see the baseball program get good again under Tony Vitello, and just you can tell these Tennessee fans, the supporters and whatnot, that they're really embracing this team. And you just wait to see when Tennessee football can get to that level that baseball is at, and just the fan base and the excitement around that when it does get to that level again.
No doubt. And again, you know, Tony Vitello has been a guy that I know a lot of people have suited for and have talked about wanting to get. And I'm going to ask you about that here toward the end. But I want to start with some recruiting, Dan, because again, you know, it opened back up. Kids are able to take visits now, go see campus, work out if they're available to, and different stuff like that. How have you grading Josh Heupel so far? And still, it's really early, and it's his first year there. You're already kind of behind the eight ball. We already know the NCAA stuff. It's kind of looming. But how do you think he's done so far in the recruiting realm for Tennessee as the head man?
Right. I think you said it perfectly. Just hired January 27th. You had the NCAA stuff. You have the COVID factor, and it was restricted this spring to have recruits and prospects on campus like it was all of last year since March of 2020. And June 1st hits, and I was talking with Hugh Freeze on my podcast, I guess a week or so ago, right after the June 1st date hit, where you could start having prospects on campus. And Coach Freeze was just saying, man, I was just not ready for when that June 1st hit, because we didn't have prospects on campus. And then all of a sudden it went from 0 to 100 and something miles an hour all at once. And, you know, Josh Heupel and Tennessee's coaching staff, I'm sure they would say the same exact thing. And you see it on social media with all these recruits and prospects, whether it be the 22 or 23 or even 24 prospects, just posting every day. So they haven't missed a beat. That they've had, it seems like, prospects and future players on campus every day since the NCAA lifted the restrictions. And, you know, Tennessee took advantage of it as far as when they were hosting these regional and super regionals on campus at Lindsey Nelson Stadium. It just seemed like they kind of had some recruits go into that hype also, and from a selling point saying, look, this is where we want to take the direction of this football program and get it good again. But I think with Josh Heupel, he's got 6 commits right now for this 2022 class. And he's got some good pieces, I think, and I think some decent pieces that can fit his offensive scheme. Obviously, you want to get that number continuing to go upwards with this early signing period that we're accustomed to now in mid-December. But I think Taven Jackson, this quarterback from Indiana, I've talked to one of his coaches, had him on my podcast as well, just to kind of get a feel for what kind of quarterback he is. It seems like he can really do it all. He's mobile, but can make some throws too. And I think they're really, really high on Taven Jackson. I believe 247 has him as a 4-star. And you look at a guy like Brian Grant, he's 6'6", maybe 275, 280. I think he's a guy that you could potentially see as maybe a left or right tackle in this offensive scheme. So Dylan Sampson, he committed, I believe, June 13th from Louisiana. That was a big time get, 3-star running back. But those type running backs like Dylan is, it's what they have a vision for in this offense that we've seen Josh Heupel do as a head coach and an offensive coordinator over the years.
Yeah, and again, being able to take advantage of the time on campus and using the super regional, as you said, to boost recruiting and get the mojo back a little bit and show the vision and where they want to be. Who are a couple guys, Dan, to keep an eye out if you're a Tennessee fan or just a recruiting fan in general, the SEC, because it's amazing. There's a lot of sharks in the same water going after the chum. But who are a few guys that Tennessee fans need to keep their eye on as the summer turns into the fall, you think?
Well, as far as recruits right now, I just think it's kind of wide open.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's so many people out there just posting about their visits, and we'll probably see a little bit more in depth when things kind of cool off. When we get, I don't know, maybe 3 weeks from now when we get into SEC media days, and then a week after that or whatnot into fall training camp. I think we're going to start seeing a transition around that calendar date. So when we can really pinpoint some really good prospects out of all these visits and all these recruits just posting on social media.
Yeah, and it's amazing. The players aren't only having to play catch up. It's really hard to evaluate somebody just off of highlight films. You want to be able to see them in person. These camps are huge for a lot of people. And Dan, there's a lot of kids that get offers just showing up and balling out during the camp. Some guys that are unknown sometimes. And when I look at Tennessee and Josh Heupel, and you mentioned the type players that he's recruiting, can you kind of define the type players? Is it more of a, you don't have to be a 6'2", 230-pound running back in this offense? Is it more of the guys that are speedy, that are able to really kind of fit that fast-paced NASCAR? We're going to throw the screens, we're going to have a little run game, but really spit it out and try and get you in one-on-one situations?
Yeah, it is. And I think, and, people are looking at this Tennessee team, and the record wasn't there, obviously, last year, 3-7 in an all SEC schedule, the NCAA stuff, coaching change. But I'll say this, with all the coaching changes over the years Tennessee's had since Philip Fulmer after the 2008 season, I think this is the best roster, at least offensively. And I think there's some parts on defense, too, to work with, maybe not depth-wise, because so many people transferred. But offensively, I think for a first-year head coach compared to what Jeremy Pruitt and Butch Jones and Derek Dooley, and I guess you could say Lane Kiffin for that 1 year, I think Josh Heupel's got the most to work with offensively for a first-year head coach at Tennessee since Philip Fulmer. And back to your point with speaking of running backs, I mean, you look at the speedy type backs. You got Jabari Small, you got T. Hodge, who's a bigger back. Look at D. Beckwith. He's 6'4", 6'5". He's a big body. You got Tyon Evans, who's going to be a smaller type back coming from the JUCO ranks. I just think there's a lot to work with, and you kind of see that in the wide receiver unit also. And I think that's why Josh Heupel is going to have a lot of different things to work with. I think it just comes down to finding who the quarterback's going to be on this roster for this 2021 season. And we saw Joe Milton, he transferred in from Michigan. This is a guy, obviously he transferred in right after the spring game, did not go through spring practices with Tennessee, but this is a guy that Josh Heupel's had on his radar ever since he was offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach at Missouri. He recruited Milton to Missouri, offered him a scholarship there. Obviously, Joe goes to Michigan, but he's brought in now. I think it's a guy that they definitely want to get a feel for this summer, 7-on-7 work, and then into fall training camp. And you just look down through the roster also with transfers. I think Josh has done a really good job piecing in holes in the roster, especially on defense. I mean, look how many transfers they have. They have Kamal Hayden, a cornerback, transfer.
Auburn transfer. Yep.
Exactly. And then from Kansas, the John Terry lineman on the defensive side, he just transferred in. Caleb Tremblay's another defensive lineman, transferred from USC to Tennessee. And then another in-conference guy, Javonte Payton, a wide receiver from Mississippi State. William Mohan, a linebacker, he played at Michigan also. And then from Texas, Jawan Mitchell at linebacker. So
Juju,
I think
I coached him in junior college. Yep. I know Juju really well. Yep.
Yeah. So I just think that they obviously had some guys, and 3 guys transfer out to Oklahoma, and you had Ty Chandler, the running back, going to North Carolina. Some other guys transferred out. But I think in this age of the transfer portal, Josh Heupel being a transfer himself to Oklahoma in his day, I think he's really attacked this pretty well. On top of that, he is kind of taking his time a little bit with the recruiting. And like you said, finally getting these guys on campus. And, we'll just see how it continues to play out as we get closer to training camp.
Is my last recruiting question for you, Dan. We're here with Dan Harralson, editor for Vols Wire for USA Today, also the host of the Tennessee Two-A-Days podcast. Definitely go check that out. Do you think Tennessee's done in the portal? We know we got that July deadline coming up for eligibility for this next year. Do you think they're going to try and sneak a few more guys in, or do you think they've kind of got it wrapped on the portal?
I would say they would probably, you could possibly see one guy. I don't know, but you're right. It is approaching. And I just think at this point in time, you're getting to, I keep bringing this up, the media days and the training camp calendar dates. I think you're getting to a point where you kind of want to go ahead and get a feel for your roster, go ahead and get it ready. So maybe one, I don't know. We'll see, because the transfer portal is so heavy right now. But I think we could probably start seeing this roster kind of get concrete and start taking its place.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see. The portal keeps giveth. It'll taketh away, but it sure will giveth. And until that deadline hits, you never really know, because everybody's always trying to add a piece as long as it fits in the locker room and in other areas. But, Dan, before I let you go, Tennessee, a huge year in baseball. And really, my question to you isn't even about, how they do in the College World Series. Obviously, they lost to Virginia the other day. At some point, Virginia double dribbled during that game as well, but I'm not going to get into that, even though it's baseball. A lot of people are going to get that joke. But to me, it seemed like Tennessee really needed this. And for one of the 3 major sports to have a breakthrough year, to have a guy like Tony Vitello, and again, you can just feel the momentum, and he does it his own way. Is this something that was huge for the Tennessee athletic department and really for the fan base? Because we all know how passionate Tennessee fans are, and they haven't really been given a ton, outside of some decent basketball here or there. Was this big for the athletic department and the fans?
Yeah, I think so. And it really kind of hit all at once, because a few of the series when they started SEC play, they were sweeping LSU early on, I guess late March, and some other big series wins. And you didn't have the crowds out there, but people were embracing this team because they were watching it on SEC Network, SEC, ESPN app, whatever. And people were in this little bubble like everybody has in the world and in the United States, that I want to go to a game, just to go to the game without a mask on or no restrictions with seating capacity. So it all hit at once. And we all know about the struggles also with Tennessee athletics and football, and basketball has done a pretty good job under Rick Barnes. Barnes has got this team competing for SEC championships and into the NCAA tournament, but they can't really get to that next step, Elite Eight, Final Four, national championship. So there's a bad taste a little bit with basketball, even though people are still behind Rick Barnes. But yeah, just the way these guys play with a lot of energy, emotion, the walk-offs, Tony Vitello, a lot of people like him, and it just all hit at once. And so people have really embraced it. And I think now that we see, and I think Tony's going to end up staying at Tennessee, but now you have this talk of, is he going to go to LSU? Is he going to stay at Tennessee? When's that contract going to get done? When's he going to get paid by Danny White, the new athletics director? Now you have all that talk on sports radio, and it's fun to see, actually, because this usually is the dog days of summer before we get into mid-July. And it's June 21st, and we have a lot to talk about. So it is definitely been fun to keep up with baseball.
Yeah, and again, it's interesting to see. We're recording this on Monday. Tennessee's got another game to go. Hopefully they win that one and keep moving on. Always rooting for the SEC teams. But Dan, great stuff. Got to get you back on, brother, as we get closer to the season. Very interested to get your take on Tennessee as we move into fall camp, and that quarterback battle should be a hell of a battle. Can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media and where they can find your content as well?
Sure, yes. The Twitter handle's at Dan Harralson. And if you just type in ballswire.com, you'll go to the website.
Awesome, man. Well, Dan, I appreciate it, buddy, and look forward to talking again.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Hey, stay tuned with us. Got another great interview and part of the Recruiting Roundup, segmenting it, helping you win the water cooler. Stay with us. Now we shift our recruiting energies from Tennessee to Texas A&M, and there is not a better guy on the planet to have here talking about this than co-owner, editor of TexAgs.com. If you're a Texas A&M fan, number one, I'm sure you already know about this. The three that aren't are probably on an island somewhere with a volleyball with a face painted on it. But that's Billy Liucci. Billy, really excited to get you here, brother.
I appreciate it, Jake, always. And if they're on that island, as long as they have service, it's probably him and what's the guy's name? Wilson.
Wilson. That's exactly right.
They've probably been enjoying the recent news coming out of Aggie Land between recruiting and the new baseball coach.
Listen, man, they may be afraid to leave the island. They think they may jinx it the way it's going. Right. But before we get to Billy, I do, since we're talking about recruiting, want to give a shout out to Dynasty U. It's an unbelievable app. It's like LinkedIn for recruiting, for prospects, for coaches. There's a lot of college coaches that love this. I've sat in that room. I know how painful it is to have to go click and go to Huddle. And if you don't have the Chrome block, you got to watch the ad. Then you got to click to something else and this, that, and the other. This puts it all in one place. It's unbelievably concise from your GPA, highlights, social media, anything you want on there. It's easy to build. It's easy to navigate, and it gets eyes on your child or whoever you're trying to get recruited. It doesn't guarantee a scholarship. That's what the tape and the grades do, but you need to download the Dynasty U app right now from the Google Play Store or anywhere that you get your apps, and it's free right now. But like I say, get it while the getting's good, because it's not going to last free for long. It's flying off the shelves like people are panic buying it. But Billy, want to get right into it, man. Texas A&M right now, we know on the field the success they had last year and what Jimbo has done putting these classes together. And just looking at it right now, since we're back open, 8 commits, Connor Wegman, 5-star, a guy I know they're very excited about, and they're in on a lot of big guys. Bear Alexander decommitted from Georgia. We know Smoke Bowie decommitted from Georgia, and you seem to see A&M popping up everywhere. Just for a second, can you talk about the 8 commitments, and then we'll move on to kind of who's out there and who they may have a chance to snag here in the coming future?
Yeah, I think right now, You mentioned Connor Wegman as a 5-star, and A&M they went all in on the quarterback from Bridgeland when a lot of people thought he was going to end up at Oklahoma. When that offer was made, it was kind of a love at first sight thing between Connor and the Aggies, and that materialized from offer to commitment very quickly. And he's been one of the most solid and vocal guys. Pretty exceptional dual threat talent. You go watch what he did at a very new high school down there. On the northwest side of Houston, and what he's done in terms of taking them, to the playoffs and type season he had as a junior. Just as good on the baseball diamond, obviously. He's a guy that'll get drafted in that sport as well, but fully expected to be wearing maroon and white and playing both sports for Fisher and Jim Schlossnagle. So up 2 guys from Dickinson High School where Jalen Weidemeier's from. One, a really athletic offensive lineman in PJ Williams, and the second, Donovan Green, tight end, and he's going to really follow right into Weidemeier's all SEC, if not all American. I know he's second team preseason All American footsteps. He was here last week catching passes from a guy that I think A&M's in really good shape with, 2023 quarterback Eli Holstein out of Louisiana, who I don't know how many guys I've seen throw a ball like him in the camp setting, and his size and athleticism. I think he's a future 5-star in his own right. But watching Donovan Green catch the ball, that's a 5-star tight end if I've ever seen one. Mm-hmm. So we'll see if there's some adjustment as the season goes on, because I know he's off that cut line a little bit as a high 4. But those guys, and also Hunter Erb is an offensive lineman that A&M really got way out in front of. Beat out OU for him at the finish line, but he's a guy whose stock in the rankings has soared. Just a nasty, big 320-pounder in the trenches. Noah Thomas, 6'5" wide receiver on the outside. He's their first commitment at receiver. That's going to be a big need for them. And then defensively right now, they've got just a couple in Bobby Taylor from Katy. He's a corner, son of longtime NFL Pro Bowler Bobby Taylor out of Longview, Texas, and then Notre Dame, Philadelphia Eagles star. Malik Silla, his high school teammate at Katy, is a 5-star, right, depending on which service you look at. He's right there on the cut line of the composite 5 at defensive end. Really what A&M needs, Jake, one of those, they're getting so much size and strength and power up front, and they're getting one of those twitchy edge rushers. You know, I feel like it's something that, as crazy as it sounds, it's one of the things I haven't seen as much of the last few years at Bama. You know, you're thinking of like a bigger version, but like a Tim Williams type of guy, Barkevius Mingo, Kalavin Chason, you know, those long rangy edge rushers that have had a lot of success in the SEC. And then the most recent commit is Martrell Harris, linebacker out of the Woodlands, who's a really interesting story because A&M never blinked on him. He transferred, had to sit out his sophomore year, played JV. I mean, he played JV as a sophomore. Junior year played about 5 or so games, broken collarbone, out. So not a lot of tape. A&M's prioritized him from day one and never wavered. So that was a big commitment for them in that building this past weekend.
Yeah, and you know, Jimbo, and look, we all know the stars in that situation, but Jimbo's the guy that's going to evaluate guys the way he wants to. And it's amazing how the stars tend to follow once these big offers get in there. And there's an offensive lineman, and correct me if I'm wrong, Billy, the name escapes me right now, but there's an offensive lineman out of Washington that I think came down in camp that the A&M staff was all over. Can you just for a second expound on that? I know you guys have talked about that. And that's just how it happens. Now that kids can come to camp, that was my biggest thing last year, was that a lot of kids lost a ton of opportunities. We see it every year, Billy, when you can't go up there and show your stuff and prove it on the field. And that's a testament to Jimbo and his staff.
Yeah, they went on a guy named Mark Nabu, who was committed to UW. And he's from Seattle, so they were obviously Washington was very familiar with him. Committed to them, came to camp in College Station, was there 2 days. He's 6'4", 325 pounds, 320 at least. Moved exceptionally well, really powerful. A&M's in on a couple borderline 5-star O-linemen from the Houston area, and they dearly want both of those guys. And I've mentioned the 2 committed, but they thought highly enough of Mark to offer. And now he's got visits. I believe he was at Michigan either yesterday or today. USC is coming up. Yeah. I think Oklahoma's getting involved now. So this is a guy whose stock is skyrocketing. He just officially visited Aggieland this past weekend with his family. I like A&M's chances there. I mean, It's interesting because the Aggies have gone regularly up to the Northeast, signing guys from Philly, Brooklyn, New Jersey, multiple guys from New Jersey and Pennsylvania and in Brooklyn this past class. They've gotten guys out of the D.C. area, obviously throughout the Deep South. Now they got a very real shot at someone from Washington, you know, coveted offensive lineman in their eyes, and then also Arizona, Anthony Lucas. And they might be a little behind on him and another borderline 5-star D lineman. It's probably A&M and Notre Dame. The Irish, based on everything you hear, based on the whispers, seem to have an edge there right now. I don't know if he's in a rush to decide, though, so that'll be an interesting battle worth watching.
Yeah, somebody needs to steal his towel. Just make sure it's not, superimposed onto his pants. Speaking of Notre Dame and Texas A&M, I actually watched the 12th man deal the other day where the kickoff team took Tim Brown's towel. That's a great story, and I know it's in Texas A&M lore. But, I mentioned Bear Alexander. I mentioned Smoke Bowie. I mean, Bear Alexander, if you're going to beat Bama and Georgia, that's the type of kid that you've got to get, because that's the type of kid that Georgia and Alabama, and listen, A&M's recruited great and had success, but that to me is the prototypical type lineman that you have to be able to snag to start to consistently not only compete, but beat a team like Alabama and Georgia. How do you think A&M stacks with him?
Well, I think I think A&M will end up landing Bear when it's all said and done. It's not a given or guarantee. There's a lot of recruiting to be done, but I believe when the dust settles, I think you'll see Big Bear staying in state and wearing maroon and white. Now, with that said, A&M has, and that's part of their sales pitch to Bear, is they've done a hell of a job recruiting up front. He's going to be surrounded by some Bama, Georgia type guys. In other words, you don't have to go to Athens or Tuscaloosa right now to play alongside. I just mentioned Malik Silla, borderline 5-star. You've got DeMarvin Leal's likely to be
he's a
top
freak, Billy. He's a freak.
Yeah, Marv might be a top 10, maybe even higher pick this year. And you've got McKinley Jackson was a huge win for A&M over Bama out of the state of Mississippi a couple years ago. Bobby Brown just went in the 4th round, leaving early. So they've had quite a bit of success recruiting up front, and that doesn't even count the guys they've developed, like Michael Clemens, who's going to end up leaving A&M drafted, Tyree Johnson, who's had 2 sacks the last time we saw him in the bowl game. So D-line wise, yeah, they need to continue, and I think Bear's special. I think he's a special talent, and he could be a game-changing type dude. But where they really, I think, where you look at Georgia and Bama and LSU and you see a big difference defensively, Jalen Jones notwithstanding.
Yeah.
The guys in the first 3 years under Mike Elko that A&M's had at corner, 2 things. Number one, it might be the position you have to recruit the most elite at on defense because of the receivers you play against. I mean, look at LSU 2 years ago, even this past year. Look at Bama, obviously. Look at, Kadarius Toney, and not that your corner is going to be locked up on Pitts very much, but Toney and Pitts. A&M played Clemson 2 years in a row. So in the 3 years where they've really had issues, a lot less this past season with Jones and Jalen and Miles Jones, but where they've really had issues is on the island at corner. And I think that's an area, Jake, where they need to close the ground. And that's where Smoke Bowie, in my opinion, becomes a very big deal. They actually have an A&M legacy in Terrence Brooks, whose dad coined the phrase wrecking crew back in the 80s. And he just, for whatever reason, not giving the Aggies a really strong look, not strong enough to be one of his 5 officials. So unless the Aggies really rally, but Smoke Bowie, if you go get him out of Georgia, not only is it a hit, obviously, to Kirby and the Dogs, but it's a real spot of need for Texas A&M, and it would be, I think, as big a deal as anybody they sign on defense.
Yeah. Now when you're talking about the secondary, and Billy, I think obviously you're one of the most well-informed guys around, and that's been the difference in Texas A&M's ascent recently is up front, and then now you supplement that with guys in the back end. Is it more of a getting elite players out there at corner, or is it getting enough depth to have enough guys to be able to compete at that position throughout the season? Because those are 2 different things. Is it just getting the actual guys, or is it getting that room where it has to be to where you can make it through a whole season, or obviously a combination of both?
They were fortunate this past year, Jake. They had, they really went the whole season with 2. Elijah Blades had, and I don't know if he actually picked Florida in the last couple of days, if they're taking him or what, but Elijah opted out mid-season, randomly, middle of the season, opted back in, played in even a game or 2, and then kind of took himself out at halftime, just didn't feel right, and he's out. It was a really, I'll say this, not a guy that you really went through the season being able to depend on. So to me, they had 2, and by the end of the season, there was a JC transfer that had kind of just gotten ready to play right there at the end of the season. But really, they went through the whole season with 2 corners. Luckily, they had, when Miles Jones got hurt, they had a 3rd guy that was finally ready, but struggled at times out there on the island with in the Tennessee game and the bowl game. So they didn't have that depth. So to answer your question, it's both. Okay. I still think, look, Jalen Jones was a 5-star, started every game last year. He's that dude, but they need more. Tyreek Chappelle, Deuce Harmon, true freshmen that were mid-termers that were particularly impressive. And then Drayden Norwood's a guy that's come in from Arkansas from the state of Arkansas. He's a freshman recruit. He's come in and turned heads early, but they need those guys to pan out for those depth purposes at this point. And then moving forward, yeah, I mean, I just don't think they've recruited. Like if you look at D-line, you look at running back, where they went Spiller, A-Chain, and 5-star LJ Johnson, and they're going to get another good one this year. You look at quarterback, where they went King, Eli Stowers, now Wigman, maybe Holstein next. That we'll wait and see on that. These positions, I could go up and down the roster and do this, where it doesn't quite stack up on that level and guys can pan out. Like I think Chappelle and Harmon and possibly Norwood are going to end up being much better than their rankings. And in fairness, A&M and Elko and TJ Rushing and Mo Linguist before them turned down guys that signed from Texas and elsewhere with Georgia, Alabama, LSU, Texas. They turned them down. Like whether they could have had them or not, a lot of them they could have had. They were, Houston area or Texas kids, and they took a flyer on them. And so we'll see development-wise. So I'm not saying some of these lesser guys aren't going to be better than the higher-rated ones, but they're not at that position. You haven't been welcoming as many Jalen Jones, who's the exception, DeMarvin Leal, McKinley Jackson. You look in the second at safety, Damani Richardson, Leon O'Neal, Antonio Johnson. You have some Brian Williams was a 5-star back there at safety. So a lot of bigger names at safety, D-line, O-line this past class, quarterback, running back, receiver, and corner. The perimeter, Jake, is where I think if A&M can take, that's kind of like that final frontier of getting the game changers.
Yeah, and again, the rosters are so well balanced at the top in the SEC that even the smallest gap is something you got to close. But A&M's doing it. And Billy, I do got to ask you one more question before I ask you about the new Texas A&M baseball hire. I know a lot of people are fired up about that. You guys have been putting out great content. Him talking about being able to walk into a school with that Aggie gear brings a little more juice in recruiting, and that's typically how it does. But how do you think this class right now and its forecasting and a lot of things can happen? Does this look like another top 5 class for A&M coming up this season? Because, I mean, if you look at follow the bouncing balls per se, I'd be very surprised if they weren't in there.
They've this time of year, Jake, I have such a hard time trying to.
It's tough. I know, man. It's tough.
Trying to vet out the other schools yet until their classes start filling up. So it's like, what I really know are the A&M targets and which ones I think A&M is going to get, who's a coin flip, which guys are going elsewhere. Bama, Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State, LSU. I mean, there's 5 right there that are going to be there every year. And A&M has been right there too. Oregon typically is going to. So you got about 7. And I feel like USC is starting to make strides too. To answer your question, yes, I do think they end up there because I think the state of Texas is so deep this year. On top of that, you've got A&M, with what they do out of state. We talked about several of those guys just now. So, yeah, I do think they get back in there. They went 3, 6, 7 composite the last 3 years. I say 3. They were 3, and then Texas did that smoke and mirrors thing with who's the big receiver out of California that they
I
got
know exactly
double.
Who you're talking about.
Like they didn't sign him, then they got credit for him because he flipped. Then he went back to USC, but they didn't take the credit away, and that moved them up into the top 5. So anyway, realistic, they were 3, 6, 7. I think they get back in there into the top 5, but it's so competitive. It's just a question to me. At some point, if you do this long enough, you can look at the classes. You see which ones are kind of up there just because they signed 3 or 4 more guys than everyone else. So you kind of throw that one out or move it down a little bit. There's always kind of a definitive cut line where you can say that's championship level class. Yeah. In the SEC, the burden of proof's a little higher, obviously, but there's a cut line. And in my opinion, and I think anybody you'd really ask that covers or follows this stuff, Jimbo's last 3 classes have been on the right side of that cut line. And I think this one will as well, whether it comes in at number 3, number 4, or number 6.
Yeah. And again, you get to that point a lot of times outside of the crazy classes that Bama's had every now and then, you're splitting hairs. I mean, you really are. And look, some guys pan out, some guys don't. You look at the average star rating in the NFL, all that stuff, there's a lot of guys that can play and being able to go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I want to tell you something that I think nobody thinks about when you're talking about A&M. And a lot of times A&M fans will say this and say, well, we're not closing the ground on Bama or LSU because, like, if the Aggies were 6 or 7 and Alabama was 1 and LSU was 4, well, we're not closing the gap. You are closing the gap.
Yeah.
Here's why, and you get this, and a lot of people, you especially from coaching, you know how this. Every class that leaves, you're now. If you look up next year, and A&M's got the number 3, number 6, number 7, and number 4 classes on campus. Now their whole roster, all 4 classes, everyone in that building was a part of a class ranked in the top 6 or 7. Last year, this year, that's not been the case. Jimbo's first class of guys are about to be juniors. Now, I think a bunch of them, at least 3, if not 4 of them, will leave early and get drafted really high. So that's when you start seeing that what's going out is the same as the Bamas and LSUs of the world. And that's when you start to go, okay, now you need to close. Now it's harder to close the gap. It's been really easy to close the gap so far because there was such a big gap. So with every class going out, like A&M didn't have a guy drafted in the first. Well, Kellen went in round 3. So they had 1 guy drafted in the first 3 rounds. I don't know what the number was for Bama, Georgia, LSU, Florida. They had more than 1 in the first 3 rounds. And they brought in the number 7 ranked class. That is the definition of closing the gap. Yeah. So A&M can do that for 1 more class. And then you start measuring everything, dead on equal, in my opinion.
Yeah. And a great way to measure it, look at the scoreboard. I mean, just win 11-1. I mean, that's at the end of the day, women lie, men lie. Those numbers don't lie. And it's a great point, Billy. And my last question, we're here with Billy Liucci from TexAgs.com. Like I said, if you're a Texas A&M fan, I'm sure you're already on it. But if not, please wake up. But Billy, big hire for A&M baseball. I know you guys are fired up. Coach Schlossnagle from TCU staying in state to grab a damn good one. And it feels like, A&M's a place where you can win in baseball. Shocked they haven't, won more. We've talked about this the last time you came on, but the excitement for Coach Schlossnagle, I know he's hit the trail. Your thoughts on the hire and the reaction from the fan base?
I think the fans are really fired up. And this has kind of been something that for the last couple of years, and then you had the COVID kind of break that up. But it's something that I think fans were kind of ready for a change. Rob Childress did a really nice job while he was here, but it was 16 years plus. To go get a guy that's been to Omaha 5 times. The last 2 A&M coaches were here for 30 plus years and won a combined 4. Mark Johnson won 1 game. So combined, they'd won 1 game in Omaha. Slosh is sitting at, I don't know what it is, like 7-7 or 8-7.
TCU always shows well when they get there. They always
show well. They've been to the equivalent of the Final Four twice under him. One game away from the final series. And you got to remember, if you're from around here, TCU was awful at baseball before he got there. They did nothing. They were not top tier in the SWC or whatever other conference they were in. They did nothing. He came in and built them into a national powerhouse program. And I've said it before, I stand by it. Texas A&M, of all the jobs at A&M, Texas A&M baseball is, I believe, the closest thing to where you just go, that is the best job on campus. More so even than football. And that's hard, and I think it's a top 5 job in football. People will say, oh, there's no fine, top 7, whatever you want to say, top 10. It's way up there in football as a job. People got that confused when A&M was hiring Jimbo. I said, Texas A&M's a better job than Florida State.
I mean, it is. Just look around. Look at the resources, the facilities, the fan base. Not that there's not FSU fans, but A&M is one of the few schools in the country you can build a powerhouse at. You really can. And I didn't mean to cut you off, but no, that's exactly right in my opinion.
And the baseball job is that, and then some.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, and there's so much baseball talent. I'm telling you, you could win a national title recruiting Houston alone. And he's not going to do that. But by the way, the Bryan College Station area has a bunch of dudes that are playing all over the country right now, and multiple kids that are signed on with A&M as well. Schlossnagle had, his ace closer a couple of years ago that got them to Omaha, that shut down A&M in a super regional game 3, was from College Station.
Ooh.
So there's plenty of talent here on the way to Houston. And it's a gold mine of a job. And you just hired a guy that, I don't go and study ranking the baseball coaches, but I know for a fact he's top 10. I think you get a lot of people say he's top 5. And if you look at his resume, very few active coaches, especially with Maneri retiring, very few active coaches can match it.
Yeah, and it's kind of a double whammy because he coaches in state, so he knows the structure. He knows where to go, like you said. That's a big plus. Something we talk about with Brian Harralson all the time, coming from one spot to the other, getting the structure down of where to go. But Billy, man, great stuff. It always is when you come on. I appreciate your time, man. I know how busy you are. Tell everybody where they can find you on social media and where they can find your content, because it's great stuff.
You can find me at on Twitter just at Billy Liucci, and to get to the website, it's at texags.com, and that's Liucci, Liucci.
Definitely, man. Well, I appreciate you, brother. Going to see you soon here in about a month or so, and be able to chop it up and talk some more. I'm sure we'll do this again very soon. I appreciate you, Billy.
Appreciate you, Jake. And I look forward to seeing you in about 3 weeks up there in Hoover. It'll be the first time we get to kick it over there. So
definitely, man. It's going to be fun, and there'll be great content coming from all different places up there. But I appreciate it, brother. Again, stay safe. Appreciate you guys joining us as well. Got another great interview recruiting coming up. It's the Roundup. Let's win the water cooler. All right, everybody, we're going to round out the recruiting roundup today with a great LSU perspective from a guy that you can find at TigerDetails as the publisher. He's also the publisher at Arkansas Rivals, and that is Mr. Jimmy Smith. Jimmy, I really appreciate you coming on, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, man.
Definitely. And, as recruiting's opened up, and this is something I've touched on and we're going to continue to touch on as we add more schools into the roundup and diversify the portfolio. But LSU in recruiting is obviously really not missed a beat. Ed Orgeron, we know in that staff, even with the turnover from last year, recruiting's really never been a problem for LSU. When you look at their class right now with the commitments they have, how do you feel? And then I want to get to some of the guys that are out there now that, we're able to do visits and we're able to do camps and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think, when you really assess LSU and their recruiting over the last couple of years, you kind of see the making of a perennial power, right? You see them putting in the places that will allow them to have success long term. And I think this class is vital to kind of add on to that, to ensure that is actually what we see transpire in the years ahead. And I think they're on their way to doing that. They have a great quarterback recruit. They have some dynamic players at the skill positions. They're getting some guys in the trenches. And one of the elite classes in the country, and they're only about a little more than halfway through. So I think when all is said and done, LSU will again emerge as one of the premier recruiting programs in the country. We'll end up with a top 5 caliber class, maybe even push into those top 3. But it'll be a lot of impact players that can not only play right away, but be difference makers long term and kind of build on that recent success they've had on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, and you look around the league, and LSU's got their hands on a lot of fires with a lot of the top guys. When you look at who is out there, and there's a ton, and it's still really early. Who are a couple guys that LSU fans need to maybe keep their eye on as we move into the month of July here?
Yeah, it's a really, really thick class in the state of Louisiana. LSU's kind of broadened their reach in recent years under Ed Orgeron, producing that national brand, recruiting on that national level, which is great. And that's probably something they'll continue to do beyond this year. But this year offers something unique in Louisiana where they could really focus 75, 80% of their scholarships in state and put together an elite class. So when you look across the board, I mean, they've got some dynamic defensive ends, Jamon Tapp, Quincy Wiggins. These are two of the most highly rated defensive ends in the entire country. Everybody wants to get their hands on these two. Wiggins, 6'5", 6'6", 255 pounds, extremely raw, only 1 year in football, and yet he's dominant on the high school field. He's dominant on the camp circuit. So the sky's the limit for a guy like that. And of course, Shaz Preston, a guy that everybody in the SEC is pretty much recruiting, has become a national recruit. USC hosted him recently on a visit. Came back to Louisiana, visited LSU. Things seem to be going fairly well there, but Georgia's making a big push. Alabama's making a big push. So really there's a lot of heavy hitters within the state's borders. And of course you go outside of the state and they really need to get offensive linemen. I think when you look at guys like Kelvin Banks and Cam Dewberry, these are two guys they've hosted on visits recently. These are two big recruits that could really, I mean, if LSU does everything right and misses on the offensive line, many will believe, including myself, that they fell short in this class. That is a major position of need moving forward. So they really have to close strong in that offensive line for them to be considered a premier class, in my opinion, and the opinion of many LSU fans.
Yeah, and again, I always say the game's won and lost up front, and typically that's going to be the difference in the games. There's a lot of skill players out there, but there's not a ton of big-time offensive tackles walking out there, or centers that can snap and step and hang with some of these nose shades and three techs that you're going to get. And with these new coaches, these hires, you look at Jake Peets, you look at Mangus, you look at Durante Jones. How would you grade the new coach hires recruiting wise, just from the little bit you've been able to see? Have they been making waves? Has it been something where you've gotten great feedback about a certain guy, or all of them?
Yeah, I think one thing that's become common is the relatability, the ability for these guys to relate to the recruits. They've gone much younger in the coaching staff, and they're really seeming to be able to connect with these kids. When you used to hear things in years past of, I know he's a great coach, he's a great guy. Yeah, we talk and you didn't hear a lot of that real connection. Now you're starting to hear, oh man, we talk all the time. We talk about things that aren't in football, and you're starting to hear those kind of things, which show that there's progress being made and building real relationships that can count on the recruiting trail. The energy level is something I've noticed, just being on camps and seeing the frequency in which these guys are reaching out to recruits. Those type of things have piqued me, have caught my interest, in something that I can say is tangible. Is this is a difference with this new staff. But yeah, the kids on the recruiting trail really seem to be responding well. I mean, the average age of this LSU coaching staff, I don't know the exact number, but it's got to be around 40 at this point, especially if you remove Ed Orgeron. Corey Raymond, who might be pushing 50, I think is one of the elders on the staff now. So you've got a really young staff that's able to connect with these kids, and it's proven to be beneficial thus far. And I think it'll prove to be beneficial throughout the year and for years to follow.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And again, when you go down to the details and the energy and being able to really form relationships, it's really hard to trick a 17, 18-year-old kid in high school, because they see fake people all the day, and having young guys that are able to, be real with them, and they understand that gives you a much better chance of being able to land that commitment. And, Jimmy, as we kind of get on the other side here, we're Jimmy Smith, publisher at TigerDetails, also at Arkansas Rivals, does a great job. He's a great follow as well on social media. I'm going to let him plug that. But have you noticed, obviously you go from a Joe Brady system to a system last year that was a little bit different with Ensminger, back to somewhat similar of an identity. Have you noticed from an offensive standpoint, is LSU kind of recruiting a little bit differently at the wide receiver position or at the running back position to maybe kind of fit this offense, or has it been pretty much the same carryover in style of player recruited in the past, is the same as the past couple of years?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think we've slowly seen a transition to where now it seems that they're all in on matching personnel with their system. If you followed LSU over the years, you seldom found 3-4 wide receivers standing 6'2", 6'4", 200+ pounds. Even a guy like Justin Jefferson might not be an ideal slot, right? 6'2", longer, lanky, came in as an outside receiver, moved them in a slot. I think they're now starting to match their skill player personnel with the things they do on offense more than they have years in the past. You're seeing guys like Corey Kiner, more of these shifty, low center of gravity type running backs that can do things in space, be versatile in the running and passing game. You're starting to see a more diverse receiver group. If you look at what they have now, they have the 5'8" Aaron Anderson, who's really dynamic. I wouldn't call him a gimmick guy, but you can do a bunch of different things with him. And then you have AJ Johnson, who's 6'3", more of a big bodied receiver. Yeah. They're going after Shaz Preston, can play inside and out. So I think offensively, you're starting to see them change their identity, both on the field and the execution of the plays they call, but with the personnel that they're lining up to execute those plays. And it's basically a new wave. It looks nothing like the Les Miles teams where you had 5 guards on the offensive line and you were pounding fullbacks into the line 30 times a game. You know, it looks quite different under this current regime with this current roster.
Yeah, and I bet it works a whole heck of a lot better too at the end of the day. And the way the game is now and the way it's getting spread out, and offense is the evolution of that. And but now, Jimmy, my last question for you is one that, you know, I'm sure you have heard and there's been talk about, but is Derek Stingley going to play on both sides of the ball this year?
Man, as a college football fan and a fan of his and the family, I sure hope so. And I say that only because he's one of the more dynamic players I've seen on either side of the ball. And I feel like football fans aren't really getting to fully appreciate what this kid can bring to the game. I know his family's really focused on playing defensive back and cornerback. They were asked multiple times through recruiting if they would entertain the option of playing both sides of the ball. They said they wanted to focus on defense initially. I think in a lot of people's eyes, maybe he took a little step back last year from his freshman campaign. So I think that might solidify their stance. And you know what, let's just focus on cornerback, because that's the way they are as a family. They're very focused and they have goals that they're trying to achieve as a family. So I don't know. I would love to see it. I'm going to tell you right now, you know, I've been involved with 7-on-7 a long time, and through the program he played with, I mean, that team's had any and everybody you can imagine at receiver, and Stingley might have been the best, if not the best, one of the best. And I'm talking Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase, Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry. They all played in the same program, and Stingley was as good as those guys at the wide receiver position. So as a football fan, I'm hopeful we get to see it, only because it's a rare ability and a rare talent that I'd like to be showcased, but I'm not certain that that's what's going to transpire in the coming year.
Yeah, and his health too, obviously last year, you know, being a little beat up as well. I wonder if that has a little inkling on what's going to happen. But look, anytime you get a dynamic player of the ball, obviously as a guy that's going to be watching and simulcast, and I'd love to see it. But Jimmy, great stuff, man. I really appreciate it. I know we're going to do this more as we get toward the season. I know you're a busy man as well. Can you tell everybody where they can find you on social media and where they can find your content as well?
Yeah, for sure. At Jimmy Detail is where you'll find me on Twitter. You know, at TigerDetails on Twitter as well. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on TikTok, all those things under the same name for the most part. And check out TigerDetails.com. Right now is a special 30 days free trial, no strings attached. Go to the site, sign up, and explore the dynamic message board with all the insider info that we offer.
There we go. And I do have to ask you, are you a former mullet toss champion, Jimmy?
Hey, 3-time mullet toss champion.
3-time mullet toss champion. That is, they had to give you a plaque or something, right?
Yeah, I had a different assortment of little gifts and gift cards over the years that we won, but it's really about bragging rights.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, my uncle drugged me out there the first time, and I just wanted to kind of shut him up, but I ended up winning the thing. And then after that, it was about defending it, right? So I'm feeling it today, though. At 40, I can barely toss the ball with the kid today at 40. So
I gotcha. Well, it's funny. That was a segue that nobody saw coming, but that's a pretty cool story. Jimmy, I appreciate you, buddy. Thank you.
All right, bud. Take care, man. Talk to you soon.
All right. We appreciate you guys as well. Make sure you subscribe, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Go to the jboyshow.com. Grab some merch. Hope you enjoyed the roundup. Mixed in a couple teams. Going to add some more next week as we keep you abreast of everything that's going on in the recruiting world of the SEC. It's been another edition of the Jboy Show. And Jboy's going. Gone.
The Jboy Show is produced by David Cohn, Technical Director Dave Hammock, Creative Director David Culbertson, Audio Engineer Feyzan Shareef, Production Assistants Blaine Crain and Kyle Orr, Executive Producers Jake Crain, Vince Thompson, Steve Chamberlain, and David Cohn. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, thejboyshow.com, for updates regarding our newest apparel and merch designs. Win the water cooler with The Jboy Show.